Greetings and welcome back to No Interruptions. I'm Kate and today we're talking about addiction, different types of addiction. Is it a disease? Is it a choice? All of these things we're talking about. Okay, so first off, I thought it might be helpful to just define addiction. That might be a good place to start with this. So if you just Google the definition of addiction, we have the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. Synonyms include dependency, craving, habit, weakness, compulsion. And then on the side here it has addiction as a neuropsychological disorder characterized by a persistent and intense urge to use a drug despite substantial harm and other negative consequences. Okay, so let's start there. Now the question here is this. Is addiction a disease only, or is it also a choice? I would argue that it's both. So first, let's talk about alcohol, and then we'll move into other types of addiction. Absolutely something that separates someone who is addicted, someone who is an alcoholic, for example. One of the main things that separates them from everyone else is that they are prone to having this compulsion or desire to drink excessively, right? So I think that there's an important difference between being addicted to alcohol and being an alcoholic. So for instance, anyone who drinks a lot repeatedly will eventually be addicted to alcohol. That's just how it is. They're conditioning their body to be exposed to these toxins and alcohol all the time, right? Because their body's going to be dependent on it. Their brain is going to associate it with this feeling that, they're drunk. And they're going to get used to that. However, an alcoholic is perhaps someone who is addicted to alcohol, maybe, or they are an alcoholic who is no longer addicted to alcohol. Let me explain. You can be an alcoholic and be sober, essentially, is what I'm saying. An alcoholic is someone who is more prone to the abuse of alcohol than someone who just, drinks to excess just because. But to an alcoholic, drinking to excess is much different than for a normal person, which is very different than saying someone is addicted to something, because that is present tense, right? It's you're right now taking part in something that is harming you, that you're addicted to, that you're dependent on. Whereas when you're an alcoholic, yes, you're more prone to that addiction, but someone who's an alcoholic can have a sober status. Now, I think the part about being more prone to addiction, I think that is absolutely a disease. However, saying that addiction is entirely a disease and entirely not someone's fault, and drug abuse or alcohol abuse or any of those things are, it's a disease, it's not their fault, all of these things. The problem with that is, number one, you're taking all of the responsibility off of the individual, and number two, you're taking away this amazing credit to those who have worked so hard to overcome their alcoholism, for example. They have to be so mentally tough to combat that on a day-to-day. They're surrounded by friends who drink, all these kinds of things. It's a mental war, right? So yes, the disease is that they're more prone. However, it is their decision as an adult whether or not they're going to take part in that. And I'm not trying to downplay how hard that is for some people, but to put all of the blame on a disease or a disorder and none on the person, there's absolutely no accountability there. Now, moving on from alcohol, we have situations where, for example, someone has to undergo a really serious surgery or something like that, and they, like pain meds, right? You've heard of this where someone underwent a surgery and they got addicted to the medication that helps them manage pain afterwards. Now, again, part of this, I really do believe, is obviously not their fault. Their body has become dependent on something in a surgery that they needed to manage the pain, right? Now, afterwards, yes, their body's addicted to it. However, it is their responsibility at that point, knowing that they're addicted to a substance, to undergo the proper treatment to get out of it, right? To get themselves off of it. Now again, I'm not downplaying how difficult that has to be for some people, especially when their body is so dependent on something, when their brain thinks that they need this thing to feel okay. But in the end, you really do have to have some level of accountability with this. Otherwise, anyone can just blame any kind of abuse of a drug on just a disease, and a person's free will has nothing to do with it, which is totally untrue. And with most other kinds of drug use, cocaine, heroin, whatever, when you're an adult and you make those decisions, whether you have an addiction or not, there is a decision involved. I know that it's always brought up, someone could have had a traumatic childhood, they could have been maybe abused, and that kind of left an imprint on them, and the way that they chose to try to escape that is through various kinds of drug use. And those things are all very sad. All of that still takes the responsibility away from the person, especially if they're carrying something really hard that they've experienced with that is partnered with that drug use. Most of the time, I don't think that drug use is helping, right? Someone who has something really heavy weighing on their heart and weighing on their mind, drug use is kind of like a band-aid to kind of like try to escape, try to cover it up, when in reality, obviously, we should all be encouraging things like therapy, things like sort of like mental rehabilitation within therapy, and actually just getting to the real root of the problem. Now, the last sort of subtopic I want to talk about within this is the fentanyl situation. Now, yes, we mentioned earlier that it's kind of a two-part dynamic between a mental disorder and a choice. Now, the fentanyl situation is a little bit different. For adults, I think it's largely probably the same. However, with the fentanyl situation when it comes to kids, when it comes to young kids, I think we're talking about something different. Number one, because these kids are so young that literally their brain is not fully developed. And also, when you're that young, you're more naive, right? You're more easily manipulated because your brain is not fully developed, because you do not have the experiences yet. So when we talk about fentanyl addiction in children and in minors, I really do think that there is something much different about that than any other kind of addiction. Yes, they're getting addicted to it. Number two, because their brain's not fully developed, they don't have the kind of big picture comprehension that most people have as adults in making decisions about drug use. And of course, there's a question of manipulation, because usually they're getting these drugs from someone older than them, like an adult. Now, bottom line, do these kids have a sort of choice to dabble in these drugs? Yes, they do. But because they're not fully developed, because their brains are not fully developed, because they largely have much less of an understanding of these things than adults do, that choice doesn't hold as much weight as it does when you're making those decisions as an adult. Which is why the fentanyl situation is so tragic and heartbreaking, is because these kids legitimately do not understand the dangers of it, and so many of them were never really given the chance to fully understand it because it was too late. And that's, I think, what makes the fentanyl situation something separate from traditional alcoholism, traditional drug use, when you're an adult. So that's my take on that. So in conclusion, we have answered the question, is addiction a disorder? Is it a disease, or is it a choice? I think it's both. Especially with adults, it's both. With children and with, young people who really aren't old enough or developed enough to make those kinds of really serious decisions and really life-changing, life-altering, or life-taking decisions. That's obviously something very different. Even though there is still a choice involved, that choice has much less weight in terms of the responsibility that should go back on the person. So, if you know someone who's struggling with substance abuse, addiction, or anything like that, I will have some links below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.
And it's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and I am asking you to please, if you like the video you just saw, support us, become a member, donate. You can send checks to P.O. Box 24, Millerton, New York, 12546, or go to Daily Clout, DAILYCLOUT, become a member or donate. Thank you so much for your support. Every penny goes for paying our hardworking staff, paying hosting costs, and paying our lawyers who have been leading the fight to keep you safe and free, to keep the Constitution safe and to keep you free. Thank you so much.